The Twisted and the Twilight DLC is upon us, bringing a whole bunch of new stuff for the Wood Elves and Skaven. But there are some new changes coming for the entire game for all factions with this coming update. Some of these are new features added to the game and some are simply reworks of existing systems. Either way, I think they're all useful and will definitely help the quality of life of Warhammer 2. So, let's have a look. So the first thing that's being added in is to do with numbers and stats. Currently in Warhammer 2, the only way we have to track a unit's performance is by how many kills they have at the end of the battle. If a unit gets 100 kills, did it kill 100 Skaven slaves or 100 Storm Vermin? One is impressive, one isn't, and we had no way to know. Until now with damage tracking. So every unit is going to have its performance tracked by the kills icon on the unit card, where you will now see two new stats. Alongside kills, we have damage dealt and damage value. From what I gather, damage dealt is pretty much the HP damage that you do to other units, how many hit points you knock off them. 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, this will be added up here. Damage value is how much that's worth in custom battles or multiplayer cost. So if you beat up some 800 cost Witch Elves and get them down to 50% health, that's 400 golds worth of value that unit will have done in damage. And we can see this all happening in real time. Here's some Cold One Riders charging into some Black Orcs. If we scroll over the Black Orc kills, we'll see their damage dealt starts to go up as they start to take health off the Cold Ones, and their damage value starts to go up because they're doing damage to that 1,000 cost unit. So this is great because we can see the performance of a unit and whether its performance is worthwhile. So Black Orcs cost around 1,100, you'd hope that they can at least make their money back. If you notice here that the damage dealt is around 2,000 and the value about 350, well, if we look at a different Black Orc unit that's fighting a different enemy, Dread Spears in this case, you can see it's actually done more damage but has less value. That's because Dread Spears don't cost as much as Cold One Riders. So while it doesn't accurately tell us what kind of unit they've been fighting, we'll get the idea of whether they were fighting higher tier units or lower tier units based on that difference between the damage dealt and damage value. Some Stone Trolls over here fighting Witch Elves and Dread Spears. They've dished out a mighty 5,000 HP's worth of damage for about 800 cost in value. As they cost 1,100, that's pretty good value for money, as it looks like they're definitely going to get more than 1,100 worth of damage in this battle. So it's a great way to see which units are pulling their weight in a battle and which ones aren't. These archers over here, these rusty arrows that cost 600, they've racked up a whopping 1,300 damage in value, but how have they done it? Well, it's because the Lord came flying in just now and they focused him down and he was worth a lot of money. It was Malekith on a black dragon, so you can imagine that's an easy bunch of damage value right there. If we look at old Grimgor, he's only got 8 kills, which makes it sound like he's really not done a lot, but one of his kills was Malekith, who he was helped smashing down with the rusty arrows, so while he didn't do a ton of damage dealt overall, the target was worth a lot of money, so the damage value is high. So there's a lot we can learn from this new damage tracker. You get to see it at the end of the battle as well. You can see the total damages that everything did. So again, you can see who pulled their weight and who didn't. These Black Orcs here got 91 kills, but only 500 damage value. So they obviously weren't beating up a very tough target, probably the Dread Spears. Whereas these other Black Orcs that got 90 kills had nearly 1,000 damage dealt. So they were obviously beating up something worth a bit more. So we can really see who's done the work and who's kind of making it look like they've done the work when they actually haven't. This will be really fun for multiplayer stuff and for tournaments to see which units were used well, where, when and why, and who they fought, what damage they did, what target they were fighting. Also going to be useful for testing stuff. So yeah, a really nice addition to the game, maybe more of a multiplayer thing than a campaign thing, but I'm sure campaign players will still find some use for it and find it interesting to see what their units did within the battle. So that's the first new thing being added, the damage tracker. Next, one for all you people that like to use casters, which hopefully should be everybody. So you know how in your current peasant version of Warhammer 2, you go to drop a spell and there's a maximum distance that you're allowed to cast the spell. There's also a minimum distance where the arrow turns red and it says target too close and you're not allowed to cast a spell there because it's just illegal. I've often found this silly and annoying because sometimes my caster gets caught out and caught in a matchup I don't want it in, and I could drop a spell on myself to save myself. But oh no, I'm not allowed because target too close. Well, no longer. Minimum cast distance has been removed for all Vortex, Explosion, Wind, Breath, Summon spells, and the Net of Amontok. which means you can now cast a spell on your own head if you want to, which might sound like a silly idea, but in some situations it's actually a really damn good idea because it really doesn't do a lot of damage to a single character. As you can see, this Pit of Shades is doing very little to the Fimir Balefiend. So next time I get Wurzak stuck in a pile of spearmen, he can finally cast Foot of Gork on himself to get rid of them and free himself up. So only a small change, but definitely a useful one. There's often times where I see a blob of troops near my caster and I want to drop a big spell on them, but I can't because target too close. Well, not anymore. This should definitely help the survivability of casters if they're able to free themselves with their own spells from units that may have them pinned down. The next one is another small change coming on the campaign map, where we're now able to abandon settlements. So when you go on any settlement that maybe you don't want, like Maidal von Galbarak here, you now have the option to abandon it. If you scroll over the main settlement itself, there's an abandon button. You click that and then it will say abandoning over the settlement itself, and then on the next turn it will simply be a nothing settlement as if it's been razed, and you will not control it any longer. This could be useful if perhaps I was allied with those Carrick Hern dwarfs just there and I wanted them to have the settlement as part of their province so that they could get stronger. That could be a useful way to abandon settlements so that your allies can take them. Or maybe it's just a settlement that's causing you problems, has lots of public order issues, maybe it's got loads of rebellions, it's a pain in the ass, you can't be bothered with it anymore, you can just abandon it and have done with it. So it's another simple little change, but a really useful one potentially in some situations. When you see a Dread Saurian coming your way, who you gonna call? If you said Ungrim Iron Fist, you'd be in safe hands, not just because he's the Slayer King, but because of changes to knockdown, bracing and collisions, meaning Footlords are now way sturdier than they used to be, and rarely get knocked down. So Ungrim can go toe to toe with a Dread Saurian without being knocked over every 5 seconds. Although realistically, Ungrim can't actually beat a Dread Saurian, but he can at least stand with it and do some good damage to it, even if he can't beat it. It's better than being put on his ass every 2 seconds every time the Dread Saurian moves. My main man Grimgor Ironhide can now slug it out with Cetra on a Kemrian War Sphinx and win, because he's the best, obviously. Look at him just tanking out that charge, tanking out the ability. He's even going to turn his back on Cetra just to mock him. Classic Grimgor. It's a glorious sight to behold. These Footlords that were often mocked for being Footlords and for not being mobile and always being knocked on the floor all the time, no longer. Now they can stay on their feet most of the time. They still do get knocked down occasionally, but it is very rare. So this is a big change and a really nice one, I think, especially for the multiplayer community where Footlords often don't get picked because they always fall on the floor, amongst other things, but now, being much sturdier, they should be much more viable. Although it still comes with some risks, because at least when you got sent flying, you couldn't be hit again because you were flying through the air away from the enemy. So, still a bit of a downside, but more of an upside than anything, so this is a really nice change. I won't go into the details of exactly how it works because it's pretty confusing and honestly doesn't really matter and you don't need to know it. All you need to know is that Lords are way more sturdier, he says as Grimgor falls on the floor. And this is the case for all Footlords, not just Ungrim and Grimgor, Vlad von Karstein, Gorok, Sigvold, you name it, they should be sturdier than they were before. There's still going to be mass and things involved, so lighter Lords like Lord Skrolk are still probably going to be a little bit knockaroundable, but shouldn't be as bad as they were before. Characters with charge defenses as well are much better at bracing than they were before, which basically increases their resistance to being knocked down, so that's going to help some as well. And apparently, overall, just all units are a bit more sturdy and don't get knocked down so often, meaning everything can fight a little bit more effectively. Only a little bit though. Size and mass are still going to come into play, so when a troll charges into a single human man, he's going to go flying because trolls are pretty heavy. Also, because of the extra sturdiness, it's now harder to pull through units. Because they don't get knocked down so easily, they will stay in front of the unit, pinning them in place or making them move that little bit slower than they normally would, until they get thinned out and then they all start falling on the floor like so. Some really nice changes to knockdowns that will hopefully improve the game. And lastly, for another relatively important change, it's all about missiles this time, with projectile vegetation grace periods. What the hell does that even mean? Well, from now on, when a unit fires a projectile from a bow or a gun or whatever, that projectile will have a 1.2 second grace period where it cannot be affected by trees. Which basically means for 1 second, your unit will now no longer plow its ammo into the tree that's 3 feet in front of it. So if you have a ding-dong who's positioned himself behind a tree, like this clown here, if he fires an arrow, it's going to go straight into this tree normally. But now it'll have 1 second where it will be able to pass through the trees, so when this guy fires an arrow, it'll go straight through the tree towards its target, unless it hits a tree later after that 1.2 seconds. So potentially useful to stop you wasting ammo if you're near the edge of a forest. If you're a bit further back, like maybe where these war dancers are, if they were firing arrows, they'd skip this first set of trees that they're near, but they might still hit these further back trees after that 1.2 seconds. So it's not going to completely get rid of trees for missiles, but it does make hiding at the edge of the forest and firing out a much more useful tactic, especially for the wood elves, who of course like to do that sort of thing. And this is for all factions and all missile units, not just the wood elves. Everybody now will get that 1.2 second grace period. So this is a really nice change. It just saves a bit of ammo. A lot of ammo does get wasted if you have an archer stood in a silly position. And realistically, if an archer was stood behind a tree, you'd think they'd have the good sense to take a few steps to the side to fire that arrow. So it just allows that silliness to go away of things shooting trees at a point blank range. So again, another small change, but it could have some pretty big impacts. It'll be interesting to see if people really make use of it, or whether it makes that much difference with the little bit of ammo that doesn't hit the trees anymore. So we'll see. It can't save you from chaos spawn, unfortunately, but there we go. So there's 5 things changing with the Twisted and Twilight update. Going to be interesting to see how they impact the game on a mass scale, but they all seem like nice improvements. Let me know what you think of these things in the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. See you in the future.